You might not know this, but tires have their birthday stamped right on the sidewall. Look for the oval symbol, and the 4-digit code inside represents the week and year of manufacture. And the guideline I've always heard is that you should replace your street tires after 5 years, even if they still look good, because the rubber will have aged and hardened. But do tires really expire after 60 months, or is that just a myth the industry pushes to sell more product? Well, we talked to elastomer experts to learn how rubber actually ages. We've got a 7-year-old set of Hypersport tires and a senior citizen of a Superbike to test them with, so we're about to get some definitive answers, or at least some more informed answers. Let's open up the shop manual. The reason people are worried about old tires or new tires that are actually a couple of years old is that over time the rubber degrades and hardens. Theoretically, that means there's going to be less traction available to you as you tip into a corner or get on the brakes to avoid that car that just pulled out in front of you. But tires aren't like fruit that goes from good to moldy overnight, so there's no set age at which they become unsafe. There are only recommendations, and because those recommendations pertain to safety, it makes sense that they would be super conservative. And yet, when I tried to substantiate that 5-year rule of thumb, I couldn't find any evidence for it outside of the riders' forums and word of mouth. Avon is the closest with a 7-year recommendation, but other manufacturers like Bridgestone, Michelin, Continental, and Dunlop all say that 10 years is the allowable service life for a properly maintained set of tires. And I gotta say, a decade? That was a surprise. The skeptic in me feels like that is way too long to trust a set of tires, at least for the way that I like to ride. So, to test the theory that tires can be good for up to 10 years, we have sourced an unused set of Bridgestone RS10s from way back in 2014. We also have a fresh set from 2020 to compare them to, and we're gonna head to the racetrack with Dave, our beater GSX-R 1000, to see how the old tires perform. So with any luck, I won't be filming the rest of this video from a hospital bed. For this test, we signed up for a public track day at Buttonwillow Raceway. And to kick things off, we installed the fresh RS10s with date codes from May and November 2020. I then took a few sessions to get familiar with the tire's handling and establish hot pressures, as well as give Dave a chance to snack on some Italian hors d'oeuvres. He slept in, so he hadn't had breakfast. The RS10s were great. I'd rate them an A in terms of handling and traction, and I was having a blast ripping around on them.
These tires feel pretty freaking good, I gotta say. Very predictable, loads of traction. Very successful first session out. Did get a couple of slides out of the rear, which means got up to the limit, so we got a good benchmark for what a new set of tires feels like. Now we're going to lever on the 7-year-old set and see how those do.
Considering how good the fresh rubber was, deciding to intentionally lever on an old set of tires was pretty difficult.
And I know, supposedly they're good, but honestly, I'm pretty nervous about it.
And yet, it had to be done. So on went the front RS10 from Halloween 2014 and the rear from early November. Hesitantly, cautiously, I rolled out on track. I was being really careful.
A warm-up lap with an extra dose of caution.
But after squirming around for a few turns like any new cold tires would, the ancient RS10s came up to temp and felt just as grippy and agile as the fresh set.
All right, trail braking deep, knee on the ground all the way through this corner, heck yeah.
It's crazy. Before I started researching this topic, if you told me to go drag a knee on 7-year-old tires, I would have flat out refused. And yet, a few laps in, I was charging at apexes and once again having a blast.
Wide open throttle! Woo!
Well, I did not see that coming. Those old tires were every bit as good as the fresh ones, even though they were 3/4 of the way through their shelf life, which was already 25% longer than I thought tires were good for. Now, the reason our old tires were still good is because they had been stored properly, and that might be more important than how many months had passed since they were made. Age is not the same thing as aging. Think of milk. It'll last for a week or more if you keep it in the fridge, But if you leave it out on the counter overnight, well, you don't want to lose that bet. It's the same thing with tires. Stored indoors, away from direct sunlight and intense heat, and a couple of other factors that we are going to discuss, tires have a very long shelf life. And if you buy your rubber from a reputable store or online retailer, they will have proper storage facilities and rotate stock to keep inventory fresh. But say you have 2 or even 3 bikes to ride and you rotate through them. In that case, tire age might become an issue. Or maybe you bought a set of tires but you don't intend to use them right away. In both situations, there are some crucial factors that are going to affect how the tires age. Tires should be stored in a cool place, like a basement or a ventilated warehouse, as opposed to a sealed shed. Once tires are in service, the only thing you can really do to reduce heat exposure is park in the shade. Ambient temperature is what it is, and sad to say it, but in hotter climates like Florida and Arizona, tires will age faster than in cooler climates like New Hampshire and Washington. Oxygen causes the atoms in the elastomer molecules to lose electrons. This oxidation causes the rubber to harden and weaken. And when your tires are in service, they're pumped full of air, which is 21% oxygen. So essentially, they're pressurized with rubber poison. You could avoid this issue by inflating your tires with nitrogen, but that's going to be a tedious and pricey endeavor. Plus, the manufacturers have already mixed antioxidants into the rubber. Now, if you are very concerned with tires that you're storing, you can always wrap them in a black trash bag. The opaque plastic will also protect them from our next reactant, light. Ultraviolet radiation causes homolytic fission, the fancy name for when molecules break down into smaller, less stable pieces. The manufacturers mix UV stabilizers into the rubber, but it gets used up. So it's very important to store tires away from sunlight. Once tires are on your bike, it is going to be better for them if you park in the shade versus in the sun. And as with hotter climates, sunnier climates will cause more rapid tire aging. Not just because of increased UV exposure, but because sun catalyzes the formation of ozone. Ozone is a more reactive form of oxygen that wreaks havoc on rubber and is the leading cause of dry rot. Ozone is created when vehicle exhaust, gasoline vapor, and other chemicals react with ultraviolet radiation and heat. Ozone is also created when air is exposed to electricity. So heavy electrical equipment like transformers, as well as appliances like refrigerators, compressors, dehumidifiers, and anything with an electric motor are going to kick off ozone as well. So if you've got any of those devices where you park your bike, they're probably not doing your tires any favor. Now, I'm not going to inconvenience myself by taking the beer fridge and air pig out of my garage, but if you're the type of psycho that wants to give your bike a museum-grade place to sleep, it's something to consider. This is just tire flex, which is unavoidable when you ride your motorcycle, but it is directly influenced by pressure, load, and speed. And we're not just talking about tread wear here, we're talking about carcass flex that fatigues the rubber and pretty much causes all of the reactions we talked about earlier to be accelerated. When tires are in storage, they don't experience much mechanical stress, but if they're stacked up in a pile, then those tires at the bottom are getting squeezed. So your best bet for storing tires is to line them up horizontally. But honestly, nothing you can do is as important for tire health as just checking your tire pressures. Have you aired up in the last 2 weeks? No? Well, then you've probably got low pressure, and that's gonna be worse for tread wear, rubber aging, and handling than anything your tires are gonna experience outside of blatant abuse like a burnout or parking under the arc of a Tesla coil. Even still, people want fresh product. I get it. So if you're going into a store, you can always just filter through the tires and buy the most recent date code. Or if you're purchasing online, you can sort by best sellers and buy something from the top of the list, since those models are gonna have the highest turnover. Alternatively, you can just buy the latest and greatest, because the newest tire from a given manufacturer, it's gonna be new. If you end up getting suspect tires or rubber of unknown origin, it's important to check the date code, but also visually inspect for tread wear, damage, and dry rot. Plus, consider the tire's intended use. Are you just gonna commute on it, or do you like to charge hard at the racetrack? The more demanding the application, the more cautious I would be with tire age. But the bottom line is that tires don't just expire after 5 years. So if the tire you're working with is less than 10 years old, isn't obviously worn out or damaged, and has been stored properly, odds are it's gonna be just fine to ride on. That's according to me, Dave here, and most importantly, the people that make the tires.